All right, I think we can start. And so welcome to everyone. Good afternoon. And today we have brought together a webinar where Rasmus, who's the CEO of Compular and has a PhD in computational physics, will talk a little bit about what modeling does and why it's useful. So without wasting much time, I'd like to pass it over to Rasmus to actually start the presentation.
Thank you, Sonia. I hope that you can hear me well.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, good. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining in. Today the topic will be how to make modeling actually useful in formulations R&D. So this might sound a little bit like giving the skeptics right when I say actually useful. Of course it's useful, why would we otherwise be doing it? But it is quite a lot easier to do modeling than to have it be useful, and that's especially true in industry. So we've been running Compular now for more than 5 years, so we've learned a lot about what not to do and a few things about what to do instead. So we thought that we would share this with people who are interested in R&D in general or modeling in R&D in particular. And it doesn't matter that much if your own interest is primarily from the experimental side of things or from the modeling side of things, because we see that there is a lot of dysfunctions that kind of stem from misunderstandings on both sides, and that require that people come together and are mindful about how they work together between modeling and experiment. But first, very quickly, who are Compular? Well, we are a startup from the west coast of Sweden in Gothenburg. We started out as a Chalmers University spin-out back in 2020. Raised money in 2022 and started recruiting the team that we currently have. And we come from the battery area, worked a lot on battery electrolytes in the early days and still do. But now we have a much wider range of applicability of our tools and the companies that we work with. So this webinar today is based on an email course that we have offered for a while, and this is still available. It's completely for free. So if you would like to dive deeper into this topic and read a little bit on it outside of just listening to me today, feel free to scan this QR code. We will also send out material after the webinar where you can get a link to how to sign up for this. And for those who prefer to get PDFs rather than emails in your inbox, it's also possible to sign up to download a PDF. So the topic of this, or the title of this email course, which I've based this webinar on, is 5 mistakes preventing experimentalists from getting value from simulations and how to overcome them. So as I already mentioned, we've seen a lot of recurring mistakes that R&D organizations do, or even people higher up than the R&D organization altogether, make mistakes which then manifest themselves in a number of ways and which can be overcome if you're mindful of them. So without further ado, I will jump into the first common mistake that we see. So the first mistake is expecting modeling to be a one-to-one replacement of experiments. This is a very natural thing to think, because if you're coming from the experimental side, or even if you're more of a manager, maybe a non-technical manager or a non-research based manager, it's very intuitive that you're doing something in the lab. That takes a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of lead times and other inconveniences. So of course, can't you just do some of it in the computer, do the exact same thing, and then it would just save time and money? That seems simple. It would be nice if that's the case. But the fact is that experiment and modeling are very different things. And just for your reference in this talk, I will use modeling to refer to both simulation and also to machine learning and AI, because both are ways of bypassing the real world and doing things virtually with the help of the computer in order to try to get more productive or save some time or cost. So because they're very different, the best way to use them is to use them in a complementary way where you rely on the different strengths and weaknesses of both. So an analogy to experiment is that it is a little bit like looking through a small and pretty dirty window, in that you only see a little piece of the yard outside. You see that tree there that the scientist in the lab coat is looking at. It's the real tree, so you will see it in all its complexity, but you will see it with somewhat limited resolution. You can't make out individual leaves there, and you can't see it from behind, for example. You can only see it from the perspective you have. But still, it does reflect the real tree, which is a strong advantage. Modeling, on the other hand, this is not the real tree. That's a grid. So how fine is the grid? That determines what detail you get from it. But you can spin it around. You can see it from behind or above or even from below the roots. But you couldn't slice into it and count the year rings, for example, because that's not part of the model. You also see that in this example, the leaves are not there in the model because that would be unfeasible to model. So there's a lot of assumptions that need to be made in order to get started with the modeling and get anywhere at all. But then once you have made those assumptions, you can tell a lot of details about the model. Well, you need to remember that the model is not the actual real world. So different strengths, and whenever you have different strengths, this is a little bit like in a company, you have people who are good at different things. So you shouldn't have the chemists doing your salaries, probably. That wouldn't be a good idea. That's why we have companies, because people are good at different things. So it's the same with experiment and modeling. So there are some additional advantages to modeling. There is no lead times waiting for chemicals or materials. There are no safety concerns unless you're using very old computers and not or like putting a blanket on them or whatever. It's very scalable as well. I mean, so you can spin up 10 simulations, or you could just run one of them. You could easily run more, especially if you're using the cloud. So another analogy that I find helpful is that experiment versus modeling is a little bit like a criminal court case, and there are different kinds of evidence. So the experiment is like a physical evidence. It's very hard to argue with hard physical evidence. If your fingerprint or DNA is at the crime scene, you have some explaining to do. But it's patchy and incomplete, and what you have is what you have. You don't oftentimes expect to find more physical evidence later. So modeling is more like the witnesses. They are reliable. And they all tend to be biased in different ways, and they have some assumptions which may not really hold. But they can paint a much more contextual, rich picture of what they saw. And if you come up with more questions, you can always interrogate them further. So once again, the strongest court cases are the ones where you use both physical evidence and witnesses to get a complete or a more complete picture of what actually happened. So that was it for mistake number 1. The second one is to keep experimentalists and modelers in separate silos. So this can look in a few different ways. It is pretty common to have a modeling department or a modeling team, and then they naturally tend to get isolated. But even when you have modelers within bigger experimental teams, like it's very common that you get some kind of segregation. And this is illustrated by a quote that we got from an actual customer who was head of R&D in an organization, and he said, "In my 20 years in R&D, I never saw anything useful come out of the modeling department." So naturally, he was pretty skeptical when we first approached him. And this is not so uncommon as it should be, unfortunately. So kind of the reason why this tends to happen is that, you know, the experimental side, that's the backbone. That's what has a long, for as long as the R&D work has been done, it's been done doing the lab work and the experimental side. So this is in a sense like perceived as the real work. The workflows are well established. They are fine-tuned and honed over many years, and it's also the ground truth for what actually works. So if you have an R&D department, you need to find out what works and then do more of that. The only way you can be sure something works is to try it and see that it works. Modeling tend to be more like the new kids in the company. Quite often, some manager or other thinks that, yes, let's cut some costs or let's be more productive and more forward-looking by using modeling. But maybe they don't have a fine enough understanding of how to actually implement modeling. So it's meant to cut costs, but of course it starts to cost more as well, because modelers are also people with salaries, and compute resources also cost money. And a lot of the time, there's a little buy-in from the R&D org, which makes it even harder for the modelers once they get in to know what to do and how to be useful. Often they are hired, as I said, by someone who doesn't have a clear picture of how they can contribute to the overall work. So that means that they get very unclear expectations and guidance on what to do. So this leaves them doing the comfortable thing, doing what they know how to do, and kind of shying away a bit from the fact that they may not have a clear sense of how they really contribute value to the company. This tends to mean that when the times are bad and teams are cut, these are among the first people who often need to go. So it's a bit of a tragedy. And sometimes it seems to work because what they're doing is interesting, but then it doesn't actually affect what's done in the experimental R&D and what's taken from R&D into scale-up or production. So the consequences of this is that people speak past each other. They use different languages in a way. They have different technical terms. They speak about different kinds of properties. If you're an experimentalist, you care about what you can measure. If you're a modeler, you care about what's kind of intuitive from first principles, what makes sense in your models. And often there's not the perfect overlap between them. So this breeds mutual distrust, and the actual consequence is that if modeling does not change what is done in the lab, then it has zero value. So this is a pretty brutal fact which people don't always see. But it is true, because you need to do R&D, you need to see what actually works, then you bring it outside of the R&D department into where it generates revenue for the company. So if the modeling doesn't change what experimentalists do, then it has zero value for the company. And of course, if you provide zero value, then you're hanging loose. So there's a lot of untapped potential because we have this complementarity. So what to do instead is to involve both experimentalists and modelers from the very beginning of a project, to co-define the scientific questions, to bring each of the sides, vocabularies and worldviews, and to understand enough of each other's to be able to share vocabulary, and then to keep the connection going so that people need to see each other regularly. Maybe not all of them, but there needs to be experimental people in the modeling meetings and vice versa. And then the modeling output needs to be directly tied to experimental decisions. So if you can't answer the question, how will the outcome of this modeling affect like the next iteration of lab work, then you have some thinking to do. Mistake number 3 is not being clear on what a model should accomplish. There's a famous quip from statistician George Box that all models are wrong, but some are useful. Another way of stating that is that there is no perfect model, because it really depends on what you need to do. No model is perfect, so you need to have the right model for the job with all its flaws and all the trade-offs that you need to strike. So if you don't have clarity on these questions, you will always fail. And the reason is that if you don't have explicit expectations, you will still have implicit expectations. There are still things that need to be true for a model to provide value. And if you don't know which these ones are, the chances of the modeling efforts happening to be useful are very low. So it matters a lot if you need accurate, kind of quantitatively accurate predictions of experimental curves, for example. If that's what you need, that's a different set of trade-offs. Maybe you can train it a lot on data on the real system. Whereas if you want to understand a mechanism, then you can't just throw in all the data that you have, because then it would just reproduce the data and not get any insight. Then you might want to go with a much simpler model instead. And it will not be quantitatively accurate, but it will show you much clearly where the qualitative trends come from. And as well, like if you have a screening tool or like a generative AI for candidate formulations, you don't necessarily care if they are all correct. They just need to be worthy of progressing to the next step of filtering out bad candidates. So you need to know what the job of a model is so that you can judge it fairly, and also know just which tool of the toolbox to use. So just a few examples here. A digital twin for safety qualification. Yeah, you definitely need to get the physics right. You need to be pretty accurate. And when you're not perfectly accurate, you need to be conservative. Otherwise, you can't use it in a safety case. Battery management system. If you have a battery, you have a little bit of you have small chips on board. They don't have infinite compute power. They do need to make decisions on a real-time basis. So those hardwares are your constraints. You can't run a model that you would run on a HPC center. Obvious, I know, but these are the kind of things that all too often people don't think about. I mentioned toy models and generative AI. So the solution for this is to always be very explicit about what are the expectations on a model or a set of models before you even start to plan the work. Mistake number 4 is to expect what works in academia to also work in industry. So the reason why this is so relevant is that, I mean, as you know, a lot of people who work in R&D labs, they come from academia. And that is even more true for modelers than it is for experimentalists. So if you are a modeler in academia, I mean, that's where the field grew up. All kinds of simulations and modeling. It's much more mature and established in academia than it is in industry. But the jobs, again, are different, what you do in academia versus what you do in industry. So in academia, you should have something that's novel and interesting and provides a lot of insight into maybe just a single system or a single formulation or a few. So it's okay that it's low throughput. It's okay that it's low volume. And it's okay that any simulation that can be pretty compute intensive because you don't need to do so many. You have some kind of grant funding and you probably have a different access to compute where a lot of the time you have incentives to spend a lot of compute to be able to get the same allotment next year. And you don't really pay out of pocket. So you can spend a lot on single simulations. This was one of the main misunderstandings I had when starting Compular, that in industry you have bigger budgets. So obviously you can spend more on a simulation. But that's very rarely the case. In academia, you can almost always spend more on each unit of simulation. Whereas in industry, you need to actually pay your costs in terms of concrete delivered value. And there's also a lot of manual tinkering and tweaking in academia. And you can tweak how you do your simulations until it works for your one system. And then you don't care if it works for a closely related system or a completely different one. You don't care. Whereas in industrial R&D, you're building a knowledge base. You're building a database of past results, and you need them to be comparable over time. You want to have a consistent setup, and you want it to be automated so that you don't need to spend that time. And time is much scarcer in industry than it is in academia. So then what I've also mentioned a few times, modeling actually needs to be actionable. The outcome needs to change what is done in the lab, otherwise it doesn't provide value. Mistake number 5, so this is the 5th and final one, is to expect one modeling approach to solve all your modeling needs. So this is a little bit like the guy holding a Swiss Army knife and using it as a hammer because all the other tools are in the Swiss Army knife. So he doesn't want to carry a tool belt. He just wanted to carry this knife. But of course, the guy who put forth a hammer, he will be ready way before, and he will get a better result. So if you are a manager recruiting people in an R&D team, and you have this idea that you should probably be able to use modeling somehow to get higher productivity, then this might sound like it's one kind of capability, but it's very unlikely that you will be able to hire one person or one set of persons with similar skill to handle all that you need to do in order to get the most value out of modeling. So you need a set of different capabilities, just as you would in any other department. Otherwise, you might not be able to tell. And this is also related to the fact that modeling is not as tightly connected to guiding experimental work as it should be. So this also means that it's easy to think that you're doing the right thing when you're building a modeling department, and you think that you have enough of the skills that you need, when in fact you have a big blind spot of things that would be more productive to use in your case. So yeah, once again, there's no perfect model. There's a bunch of trade-offs. You need to pick the right model to the right job. So that was the problems and how you can think about addressing it. So for the rest of this presentation, I will go into how we have learned from these mistakes. We've seen them done. We've done them ourselves when working with R&D departments. And now I would like to share how we think about it, or how we address it. If someone books a meeting with us and they have some problems and they would like to apply modeling to speed it up, then the first thing that we need to do is to understand how do they do their R&D work today. What's the overall structure? What's the job of the R&D project as a whole? And then from that, to understand where are the bottlenecks, what works well, what doesn't work well, and how can modeling fit in the best way. So if we spend 45 minutes with you talking about how you do things today and what you would actually like to do, what you will be judged by, what will distinguish success from failure for an R&D project, then we can be very concrete about how we think that you can get the best value out of modeling. And we offer to all industrial R&D labs. We can't do this for research labs, unfortunately, but for industrial R&D labs, we sit down for 45 minutes and we go through our questions. Based on that, we will have an outline, or we will have an understanding of the rough outline of your R&D work. From that, we can build a free report where we give modeling recommendations. So if you were to implement modeling, this is what we think you should do. These are the mistakes that we think you should be wary of. This is the size of team that we think you need if you recruit internally. And also, if we think that we can help you, we will give you a quotation for how we would approach this if we would implement it. And normally we start with a small part of the proposed work that you could get a quicker sign up on without starting a budget process. We'll use that then to build trust and show that it works. And if everyone is happy, then we can start a bigger budgeting process after that. But there's no strings attached. We're super happy to just speak for 45 minutes and give you a report, because we also learn and we want to help. We want to make sure that modeling gets a better rap than it has historically. So now I will go into a few different concrete examples of how we tend to work together with clients. So one job of modeling might be high throughput screening. And for that, we have a solution where you state in natural language what you want to achieve. And we use generative AI to generate thousands of candidate solutions. And as I mentioned, these candidates, they aren't really vetted that much. They're just ideas. So this is an ideation process if you want help with that. So then we can generate a lot of candidates. Then we have a multi-objective optimization tool. So that means that you can state there in natural language, for example, that you want high conductivity and low viscosity of an electrolyte, as an arbitrary example. And then the optimization routine will interpret that and understand that, okay, you have viscosity, conductivity, you might have price, you might have other things that you want to keep as part of the optimization procedure. Then you can set weights for each of those. So in this case, we used 30% of the weight, optimization weight should be on conductivity, 50% on viscosity, and then 20% on price sensitivity. And then you can filter on things like it can't be flammable, or it can't be toxic, or whatever it might be. And we can generate thousands of candidates. Each of those, we can do a local optimization. So you would have a formulation of, let's say, 5 different ingredients, for example. Then we can optimize so that each one of those has the right composition given those 5 ingredients. And then we'll generate in the end a short list of the most promising candidates. So this is one iteration. What happens then is that you can bring those most promising candidates into the lab and get some data, which we feed back into our model, and then we run another iteration. Or we can go look for more data in the research literature. And we have agents that handles that in a pretty automated way. And we can also run some heavier simulations to get more meat on the bones for the most interesting and underinformed data points. Example use case 2. So this is meant to illustrate a customer who are further down their R&D project probably, or their project is more about understanding chemical processes. So you need to understand what reactions will take place, at what rate, And if you change your formulation, how will these things change? So an example of that is when you have electric double layer, which could be in supercap or a battery, for example. And we can then model the molecular dynamics. We can look at the speciation of adsorbed species. And we can then also use that as input for what reactions take place. And also what redox or what reduction and oxidation potentials that different components of the system has. And final use case example is when you really need to understand reaction chains. So you might have, for example, using batteries that we know best, you might have an electrolyte and it needs to produce a high enough quality SEI, which is a protective film for those of you not in batteries, which you need to kinetically passivate an electrode surface, even though thermodynamically it's not stable. So then you need to know how do electrolyte components break down, and will they form a protective film or will they just dissolve crud in the electrolyte? So there, once again, we look at what structures form, and then we put them into quantum chemistry simulations, and we can solve for the reaction rates and how that changes over time. We can also bring this into a device level simulation in the end. So those were the mistakes, solutions for them, and some concrete examples of how this could look in practice. We made this presentation quite agnostic in terms of what area you're in, because our purview now is general liquid formulation chemistry. So if you would like to hear more about this, if you think that there is an opportunity for us to help you, either with a diagnostic or actually implementing some processes for you, feel free to contact us at info@compulartech.com. If you found this interesting and would like to read more, this is the same QR code that we showed before, so feel free to scan that and sign up for the full course. You can also sign up for a free demo account on our web app, Compular Lab. It lets you see some of the kinds of results that you can generate with the full version, and it lets you try out a few not so expensive simulations as well. And if you want any other information, you can find a lot on our webpage, compulartech.com. So thanks a lot for coming and listening, and I'm happy to take any questions that we might have in the audience.
Hi, Rasmus. This is Sambit. Thanks for the talk. I just want to ask you something like, do you account for I think one of the major bottleneck is scaling the computational modeling results to like industrial level, those sort of things. So like, how do you account for that, or is this something that you worry about a lot?
So do you mean like scanning, or sorry, scaling a process from like lab bench scale to industrial scale? Yeah. Yes, so that's actually one of the strengths of modeling, that if you can handle the physics, you can put you can change the parameters in the equations. So of course it depends. If you're doing quantum chemistry, you're not going to do that on industrial scale, obviously. Then you do it on atomic scale. But if you use multi-scale approach, which is a lot of what we actually do when we help customers, then it's no problem, because to extract the material properties, you might need to extract some morphological properties or have some constitutive parameters there. But then you can bring it all the way to industrial scale if you want. Mixing, for example, it's the same process, but the flow fields will be very different, and the flow fields required, like the parameters will be very different, but it's the same equations.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We have two questions on chat. So one is from Vijay, and the question is, are the properties calculated through real DFT and MD simulations? If yes, what engine do you use? And how does it differ from using open access DFT or MD engines integrated into a UI?
So the way we work with clients, it's like we don't just give them another DFT code or another MD code, but we use third-party tools, some of them open source, some of them closed source, where like we do a lot of benchmarking and we try out different things, and then we provide it with like one way of doing things. So if you want to screen, battery electrolytes, because that's my go-to example. Like we have a very solid setup for that. And if you use our web app, then you just say, what do you want to model? And it's just completely automated. And there will be parts of that that's MD. There are parts that are DFT. So the main thing is that you just write what are you interested in? What do you want to study? And then you get the results. Then we also have, the AI solution. There we have machine learning property regression, which is trained mostly on experimental data, but also on the output of our modeling. So that means that you can also get results in seconds rather than hours if you use that approach. But then, of course, that means that needs to require that either we've ingested some experimental data to train it on, or we've run some modeling up front. But whenever we do that, it's a one-time investment, and then that corner of chemical space will be accounted for by our models.
I hope that answers your question. So the second question that we have is, do you think weighing in multi-objective optimization is a good method for screening candidates? Are there other ways to rank and choose the top ones? And this question is from Martina.
Yeah, so weighting is a very natural starting point, but it's not always a good thing. I mean, I learned the other day from a cell maker in the battery space that you can have too low viscosity. So then just weighting like something and saying that this should be high, this should be low, that doesn't always work. So of course you can make it very much complicated. So like if you have a clear idea of what you would want to do instead in an R&D problem, we can probably help you get that done in a way that will never be like the default of the app. But if you're working with us, there might be parts that either we or you do in the app and parts that we just deliver the results, because it's easier for us to set up the simulations in-house and then just give you the results. But yeah, there are other ways of doing it. Weighing is a good starting point. Filtering is something we use a lot. So you might, for example, say that there may not be any PFAS in this. And then if the generative engine spits out PFAS, you just filter them out before you even kind of consider them.
I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to mute and ask another question or comment. Are there any more questions? Well, I don't think there are any more questions then. Well, thanks a lot for attending the webinar, and I hope, oh, sorry, there's another question, cool. How to think about validating modeling to convince experimentalists it's accurate enough?
That's a very good question, thank you. So there's not one single answer to that either. It depends a little bit on what kind of model it is. So if you need quantitative accuracy, for example, then you have to validate against something and show that you have quantitative accuracy. It might be that what you really care about, for example, is that you have a certain cationic conductivity, but it's easy to measure the total conductivity. That's one example. Then you would compare where you have an overlap. So if both the model and experiment can predict total conductivity, then that's what you use to benchmark. And if the model is not trained on specific data, but it's first principles based, then if it gets something right, it will be just as likely to get something else right. If you have trained it on a single, on a particular property, then of course, like showing that one agrees doesn't say anything about other properties. So it depends on what kind of model that it is. But we always consider this. So especially in the early days of working with someone or whenever they start a new project or look into different kinds of solutions. We make sure to do what we can on validating, and just like understanding how we can bring the most value by adding modeling. It's the same thing with validation, like how can we do the best kind of validation? And it depends on what data is available in the literature or open data sets, and what data can the client generate. Like maybe they don't do physicochemical characterization, but they build devices and test them. Then we can work with that, and we'll just do the best that we can based on both groups' capabilities. I hope that answered your question.
Yep. Well, if there are no more questions, then I actually thank all the participants to be here, and we hope to see you again in our next webinar, which would most likely be in another month or so.
Early June.
Early June, and
We'll the dates shortly.
Yes, and the next webinar would be a little bit different than the typical formats that we've been having. So we'll keep you informed, and thanks a lot for participating, and have a good day.
Thank you.